What is going on, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of Chop It Up Sports. We are finally back after a 2-week hiatus. I want to apologize to you guys. I was very busy between Thanksgiving break and our semester getting over with school here this week. Just been very busy stacking weekends between studying and heading home for the holidays. Just really haven't had the time to sit down here and discuss college football with you guys. So my apologies for that. But we are back just in time to discuss the college football playoff rankings that came out today. We can finally see who the top 12 teams are and who we're going to be looking at to make a push to win the national championship. But before we get into that, I just want to take a minute to promote our channel on social media. You can find us on Instagram and TikTok for short clips, predictions, sit down and conversations with other guests that we may have on the podcasts. And then to find our full episodes, you have to go to either 1, Spotify, or 2, YouTube, where you can get the video version of our shows. As the year progresses and as the college football season winds down, we're going to be getting into some different sports here. We're going to be looking into some college hoops, some NBA talk, and then as the collegiate track and field season kicks off, we're going to be looking into that as well. So stay tuned as we kick off the new year here in a couple weeks, just to see what we have in store for you guys. I'm very excited about it. It's going to be nice to just get some new content. It'll be a little change of scenery for the channel, and we are very excited about what we have in store for you guys. So to review on social media, Instagram and TikTok, and for our full episodes, go check us out on Spotify and YouTube. So after a wild weekend of conference championships, we finally have our playoff bracket built. At about 10 a.m. this morning, Mountain Time, we were finally able to see who our top 12 teams were going to be, what matchups favored what teams, and really who got snubbed or who didn't get snubbed from this college football playoff, depending on if you're an Alabama fan or an SMU fan. So to start the show off, we're just going to go through all 12 teams that got in, and we're going to talk about how they've looked recently, how their situation in the bracket either helps them or hurts them, and just my opinion on them as a team as a whole. So kicking it off with number 1 Oregon, big win in the Big Ten championship game last night over the Penn State Nittany Lions. Oregon has looked really dominant as of recently. I know last night was a close game against a Penn State team who, by the way, their offense just came out of nowhere. Did not expect them to hang up that many points on Dan Lanning's defense whatsoever. Drew Aller was balling, 226 and 3 tuds. That's one of the greatest games he's had to play so far this season. And if Penn State's going to want to make a run, they're going to have to see more of that from their starting quarterback. But staying focused on Oregon here, I think this defense is really legit. I have some questions about their secondary. Throughout the second half of the season, they just haven't looked the same, especially with DB Jabbar Muhammad. Usually we're seeing him matched up on the other team's wide receiver 1, and he just hasn't had the same ball skills and swagger that I feel like he normally does, especially what we saw at Washington last year. And I'm not just saying that because I'm a salty Washington fan. I'm saying that because when you look statistically over the last couple of weeks, the Oregon secondary, in my opinion, hasn't looked as good and hasn't made as many plays as they were earlier on in the year against teams like Boise or Ohio State. But on the other side of the ball, Oregon's offense is clicking. Tez Johnson, massive game last night. I'm pretty sure he got over 200 yards receiving. I'd have to double check on that. Dylan Gabriel looks good. I think he's going to probably find himself in New York for that Heisman Trophy ceremony. Now, he's not a serious contender to win it, but he's been playing good ball. He takes care of the football. We all know he's very experienced. He's been in college football since I was like 4 years old. So when you have a QB that has been playing college football for a long time, that can really elevate a team because of the fact that they can make the reads, they're not going to turn the ball over, and they're going to make smart plays. And we've seen that with Dylan Gabriel game in and game out this season. I do think Oregon is a legit national championship contender. It pains me to say that as, somewhat of an Oregon hater and a Washington fan. But this is just the most complete Oregon team that we've seen in years past. We all know how great and how explosive their offenses have been, whether it's been Marcus Mariota or Bo Nix or Justin Herbert leading the charge. The offense has never been a question. It's always been about, can the defense be enough to win it? And I think this year, yes. However, they're going to have to make some adjustments, especially when you look at their bracket, which we're going to get into in a second. They take on the winner of Tennessee and Ohio State. 2 offenses that have been kind of up and down, but when they are on fire, watch out because the Buckeyes and Volunteers run game are both very dynamic, but Oregon has a strong front 7, so really that deal breaker could be the secondary that we were just talking about. Whether or not they're going to be able to make plays, get turnovers, and give their offense extra possessions could really be a telltale sign for whether the Ducks are legit championship contenders or not. So the Ducks get the first bye. Looking at the 2 seed, the Georgia Bulldogs. What a game that was yesterday in the SEC championship game. Squeaking it out with the backup. Shout out to Gunnar Stockton, the Bulldogs backup quarterback, coming in the second half. And I wouldn't necessarily say balling, but he did enough for his team to win. And listen, when you're a backup quarterback in the SEC championship game who played against UMass and Eastern Tennessee Institute of Technology or whoever it was that Georgia played in the preseason, that is such a hard situation to go into, not only just in a big-time game, but against a Texas defense that has been dominant all year long, especially since the last time they played Georgia. They've just been shutting teams out left and right. So a lot of credit to the resilience of this Georgia team. Even though Gunnar Stockton played somewhat well in this run game, is very explosive, I think the success of this Georgia team is really going to depend on Carson Beck's availability and health. If he's not back, then I don't really know how much of a legit chance Georgia has. I know Beck hasn't been great this season, but still, that's your quarterback one. He's the guy that's getting those first-team reps with those receivers, with those tight ends. It just really mixes up a lot. And not only that, but Beck is also the starting holder for extra points and field goals for Georgia. So when you get into these close games, especially in the playoffs, every point point matters, plural, and every point matters, every kick matters. So you really have to be able to produce points and play clean football at a high level. And if your quarterback one is out, then that makes it a lot harder, especially if your offense is one-dimensional in the run game. I want to give a shout out to Mike Bobo, the Georgia offensive coordinator. I thought his play calling was elite yesterday in the SEC championship game. His ability to find different ways to run the ball and get Gunnar Stockton just easy completions in order for him to find his rhythm, especially late in the game in crunch time. Super important. I loved what I saw from him there. I do think Georgia has one of the more favorable matchups where they will face the winner of Indiana and Notre Dame. So I think they catch a little bit of a break there. Getting the bye obviously helps, getting an extra week for Beck to stay healthy. But if he can't come back in time, then I am a little concerned about this Georgia team, especially with how dull their offense has been, even with Beck at the helm. Moving on to our 3 seed, the Mountain West Conference champ, the Boise State Broncos. I was in Reno over the weekend for a track meet, but being an Idaho school, we're just down the street from Boise. And let me tell you, it was really cool to see how excited all these Boise State fans were just to see the squad back in the playoffs. This is a program that has lived in the postseason. They live to upset household names, and they have another opportunity to do that once again here in 2024. Ashton Jeanty, in my opinion, he has my Heisman vote. He's hands down the best player in college football. They're really complete on both sides of the ball. Now, with that being said, they haven't played the same level of competition of teams like Oregon and Georgia and Tennessee and things of that nature. But nevertheless, this is still a very good team that can win games. We saw them play close at Oregon and Autzen Stadium, losing by a field goal there in the closing seconds. So Boise State knows that they can play with anybody. I think the public knows that they can play with anybody. So watch out for the Broncos to make some noise. I do think they have a solid draw, taking on the winner of SMU and Penn State. Now, Penn State looked really good, especially offensively yesterday. Their defense, I have some questions for, but they're also taking on one of the best offenses in the nation in Oregon. So if we see that Boise-Penn State matchup, it'll really be down to how can Penn State limit the run game. Boise's quarterback, Maddox Madsen, he's not bad. He's really efficient with the football, but I don't know if he's necessarily a guy that is going to elevate and win you a game, especially against a Big Ten opponent like Penn State, who just has an elite defense besides last night. So as we get through this bracket, I do think Boise was lucky enough to get a good draw, especially if SMU could pull off an upset in Happy Valley. So watch out for the Broncos to make some noise on the right side of the bracket. Now, looking to our 4th conference champ, the final team to get a bye, Arizona State Sun Devils. Who would have thought we'd be sitting here in December talking about Arizona State being the final team to secure a first-round bye in this year's college football playoff? Definitely wasn't me. Had no plans to be talking about this team this late in the season. But here we are. All credit has to go to Coach Kenny Dillingham and quarterback Sam Levitt, who went to high school in Oregon, by the way. Shout out West Lynn. So to see this team in the playoff, it was really cool. I think, I really think that they're going to make some noise? Probably not, especially if they're to play Texas in the Sugar Bowl. Then I think they're at a real disadvantage there. But nevertheless, just the ability to take this program and turn them into a 3-9 team and then make them 10-2, win the Big 12 championship in dominant fashion, by the way. I mean, for those of you that watched that game, I was watching at the meet. Cam Scattaboo and Sam Levitt, that's a dynamic duo. No matter what defense they're facing, they're going to be able to be productive and make some teams really be scared on the defensive end. Levitt just doesn't turn the ball over, so don't be expecting him to be rattled by anything he sees or by any sort of pressure. He just doesn't throw interceptions. And then when you look at the run game, Scattaboo's just a tank. And if it wasn't for Ashton Genty just running all over teams, he would have an argument to be the best running back in the nation. And I know he said that he is the best running back in the nation in his post-game press conference, but come on, man. What are we doing? Ashton Genty is going to be the leading rusher all time in college football history by the end of this season. You can't be saying that stuff. Cam Scattaboo, come on, man. But nevertheless, the Sun Devils team is really fun to watch. Hopefully they can get their wide receiver 1 back. They've been dealing with some injuries on the offensive side of the ball. They get a decent draw with this Texas-Clemson game. If they run into if they run into Texas, I think it's going to be a sore sight for Sun Devils fans. I could be wrong. I just don't know if this Arizona State team has seen enough competition to be prepared for a team like Texas who can just really out-physical them and probably out-talent them at just about every position. So those are our 4 teams with the byes: Oregon, Georgia, Boise, Arizona State. Looking at who they're going to be playing, we'll start in the top left of this bracket. I'm going to try to get a graphic up on the screen, so if you're watching this on YouTube, it should be here. If you're on Spotify, we're going to be looking at Tennessee, Ohio State, the 8 and 9 seeds. The winner plays Oregon in the Rose Bowl. Breaking this down, Tennessee, really great run game here with Dylan Sampson, along with quarterback Nico Iamaleava being able to use his legs. I don't necessarily trust Nico in this situation, especially going into Columbus, an environment that's going to be rocking. They're going to be looking for revenge, especially after that catastrophic loss to Michigan a couple weeks ago in the shoe. I think Ohio State's going to bounce back. I know Ryan Day's been under the hot seat a lot, but listen, he's still a really good coach, and if there's one thing we do know about Ryan Day, he's really, really, really good against teams not named Michigan. I think Ohio State is probably going to win this game. I'm not going to make my official predictions yet. We're going to have to stay tuned till next week for that. But I just trust Ohio State at home, and I know Tennessee has a strong run game, and Ohio State's run defense has been struggling as of late. Michigan was really able to just play 4 quarters of screw you football and just kind of run it down their throat. I don't necessarily know that Tennessee is going to be able to do that. I think Ohio State's going to make adjustments on the defensive front. But this is a really interesting matchup because these are arguably the 2 best teams that didn't get a bye out of the non-conference champs. So looking at this, the fact that one of these teams has to play the number 1 seed, it really makes you think if this college football playoff is a little bit flawed, if the 2 best teams and the winner of that game has to play the number 1 seed. A little questionable, but in my opinion, I do think that nevertheless, this is going to be a great matchup. I think it's good for the college football playoff to have 2 really good teams facing off in the first round. No one wants to sit here and watch a blowout of a first round just so we can see a good matchup 2 weeks later down the road. No, that's why we expanded to 12 teams so we can have better matchups earlier on in the playoffs. I think this is really going to be interesting. Ohio State offense has to be able to pick it up. Will Howard was miserable against Michigan. He's going to have to pick it up. He's going to have to take care of the football. And I just think this side of the bracket here in the top left is really intriguing because between Oregon, Tennessee, and Ohio State, those are all teams that have pretty much broken the top 5 or at least the top 6 at some point, at some point this season. And so to see all these teams kind of cluttered together, I think is going to make for some really interesting games. Shifting over to the top right, where Georgia is running the table there. They have Notre Dame and Indiana, a little in-state rivalry, if you want to call it. I don't know if it would really be a rivalry if Indiana hasn't been relevant in years. But they're relevant this year, and that's all that matters. They'll head to South Bend to take on the Fighting Irish, who have looked really strong coming off that, I guess not coming off, but they suffered that loss to Northern Illinois early this season. A lot of people jumped ship, including myself. I'm still not really sold on Notre Dame. So I think this is going to be a really fun matchup. It's going to be cold there in South Bend. Indiana's going to come in. Kurt Cignetti's going to have these guys ready to rock and roll. You can guarantee that. This is going to be a fun matchup, and especially the winner of this is going to be interesting to see how they match up against Georgia just because they're 2 completely different teams. Indiana, on one hand, explosive. They're airing the ball out. They're running up the scoreboard. They're flying around the field. Notre Dame, under Marcus Freeman, a little more traditional. They're going to run the ball. They're going to control the clock, kind of just play a more traditional brand of football as opposed to Indiana, who has a more modern air raid style of offense. And the reason I bring that up is because that's two different looks for Georgia, and that's hard as a team to try and know what to expect when you're either going to face a team that is going to be fast-paced, airing it out, a lot of pressure on that secondary, or a team that you're going to have to load the box against, move your front eight up, creep the box, force them to throw it over the top, and that's just really hard to game plan against, especially if you're Kirby Smart. Moving down to the bottom right side of the bracket, SMU squeaks in as the final team into the playoff as the 11 seed after losing in the ACC championship to Clemson in a really close fashion. They'll go to Happy Valley to take on Penn State. That might be the worst draw out of any team, in my opinion. To have to go to Happy Valley for a playoff game, especially if it's at night, that's the last place I would want to be. But nevertheless, they get an opportunity to prove themselves that they should have been in the playoffs, that they belong here. So they'll go take on Penn State. I'm going to be honest, I don't really see a way that SMU wins this game, especially the way Penn State has been looking as of late. Now, if Penn State's defense doesn't show up and they look the way they did against Oregon, we could be in for a surprise. However, I don't think SMU has the same weapons that Oregon does offensively. And so I think this matchup really favors Penn State. And honestly, I know the conference championship is great because it grants you a first-round bye. But being able to play at home in front of one of the greatest settings in college football has to be the second best option if you're a Nittany Lion fan. To be able to be at home, loud environment is going to be rocking. Your team's been playing a good brand of football. You're coming in against, not a bad opponent, but one of the weaker teams that got into this playoff. I'm really liking that matchup. If I'm a Nittany Lion fan, winner takes on Boise in the Fiesta Bowl. Looking down in the bottom left corner, our final matchup, number 12, Clemson, the second ACC team to get in. You guys know how I feel about the ACC. I think they suck. They take on Texas. That will take place in Austin. This is really interesting because Clemson was a team that everyone kind of gave up on halfway through the season. They didn't look good. They were losing to mediocre teams. They had no top 25 wins. For the record, they're still 2-3 against teams over 500. I don't love that stat at all for Clemson. So they go on the road to take on Texas, coming off that big win last night over SMU that they almost blew, by the way. They were up 31-14 heading into the fourth quarter. Great comeback by SMU, really showing how dynamic their offense can be. Would have been great to be able to watch the end of that game, but I was actually stuck on top of a mountain with no service. Caught the highlights this morning. Great win for Clemson, great win for Dabo. Kind of shows that he's been here before, and the experience of this team really paid off down the stretch of that game as they were able to keep their composure. But looking at this Texas matchup, I really wasn't impressed with Texas at all in the SEC championship game. Defensively, I thought they were great. At the end of the game, I know they had the turnover that really gave them some momentum and allowed them to go send the game to overtime. But offensively, I just don't love what I've seen from Quinn Ewers. And that I hate to say that because I like Quinn Ewers. I think he's a really good quarterback. But I don't know if it's the injury or if the offense, if he's just in a slump. I don't know what it is. He just hasn't looked the same after that Georgia game. I know he's been beat up a little bit. But if Texas wants a real shot to win a national championship, which I think they're fully capable of, you have to be able to pick the offense up. And I think they'll have a really good opportunity to do that here against Clemson at home. So that's our playoff picture. That's what we're looking at. As the playoffs move on from week to week, we'll make our predictions of who we think is going to win. We might even do a little March Madness style selection next week where we fill out the complete bracket. But moving on to maybe the most controversial topic of the weekend was, did the committee make the right choice by putting SMU in? Now listen, both sides have a very valid argument. I totally get it. You could make the reasoning for each side, why they should have got in and that they belong over the other team because they had this win and that win and they beat this team by this many points, whatever. You can find the Pythagorean theorem for why every team in the country could get in, but that's not how this works. There's 12 teams, only 12 get in. This morning, the really only controversial selection that we were going to be looking at was who was going to be the last non-conference champ to get in, so that's the 11 seed. Obviously, the committee favors SMU, and I'm going to tell you why that's the right pick. I've seen a lot of people complaining about Bama not getting into the playoff because they had ranked wins over Georgia and South Carolina, and they play a harder schedule because they're in the SEC and the SEC is really good. Well, let me tell you something, Bama fans. You can't lose to Vanderbilt and get ran up on by Oklahoma, teams that are both 6-6 and sit at the bottom of the conference, and then try to tell me that your schedule's tough. It'd be one thing if you lost to Tennessee and Georgia and Ole Miss and all three of your losses were in the top 15. No, you had one ranked loss, and the other two teams you lost to are fighting for bowl eligibility. So I don't want to hear this whole argument that, well, Alabama's really good, they just played tough teams. No, they played mediocre teams, and they underperformed in games that they should have won. You can't punish a team like SMU, who had been money all year, lost to two teams in the top 25 by a combined 6 points, made it to their conference championship, showed that they could compete with the team that won their conference, and then say, you're not going to get in. If they would have put SMU out, it would have set a really bad precedent that even if you make your conference championship and you only have one loss, you're not automatically a lock. What you should really be doing is joining a tough conference and then losing to mediocre teams. So that's why SMU should have got into the playoff. I'm glad the committee got this right. I've seen the Bama arguments. I understand where they're coming from. I'm just here to tell you that you're wrong, and you have to accept that. You can't lose to mediocre teams. And if you're Kalen DeBoer, this is just a message directly from me personally. The grass isn't always greener on the other side, buddy. Just here to tell you, have fun with that. Before we wrap this show up, I'm going to be talking about what needs to be fixed in the college football playoff. There's been a lot of talk about how the format should be changed and how we should prioritize conference champs and all this blah, 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 blah. You've definitely heard it on ESPN or CBS, wherever you get your college news information. There's two different theories, I think, and different ways we can approach this. Talking to a lot of people over the weekend about their thoughts, I was able to kind of compile all of that in the two different ways we can approach this. The first one is to just get rid of the conference championships. It would be NFL-style format where you just play the regular season. You don't have any sort of regular season championship that you have to play in, like a conference championship that you have in college football. By getting rid of the conference championship, obviously it devalues being a winner of a conference, but at the same time, it makes it a lot easier to just identify these are our top 12 teams. The top 4 teams get a bye regardless of what conference they're in, of who they played. Doesn't matter. Give us the 4 best teams. They get a bye. The next 8 are duking it out to get to the next round. The reason I like this is because what we always hear with the playoff is the goal is to get the best 12 teams that we can possibly get. When it was 4 teams, the goal is always to get the best 4 teams possible. That's why Florida State got left out last year, because the committee didn't think that they were one of the 4 best teams after Jordan Travis got hurt. So looking at it that way, if we want to get the best 12 teams in here, then we can't be prioritizing a team like Arizona State, who is 10-2, or a Clemson team who is, 9-3, because realistically, they're not one of the 12 best teams in the nation. Even on the committee show this morning, Arizona State and Clemson still didn't even crack the top 12 in the national rankings, yet Arizona State's getting a first-round bye, and Clemson automatically clinches a spot. You just can't have that in your playoff if your goal is to get the best 12 teams possible. The second way we can approach this is still have your conference champions. They get a spot in the playoff, but it doesn't equal an automatic bye. I like this approach because I do think that conference championships have value, and I think it's important to reward those teams that have had to play a brutal conference schedule and have competed at a high level all season long, especially if you're in the Big Ten or the SEC, conferences that are just an absolute gauntlet to get through. I think there should be a reward and recognition for being dominant in a conference like that. However, it doesn't necessarily mean you get an automatic bye. I love Boise State. I love Arizona State. I love the way they play. I love their swagger, everything about them. Little underdog story. These aren't the top 4 teams in college football. Let's be real. I think Boise's really good. Definitely a top 10 team. But for them to be the 3 seed and getting a bye, that doesn't really seem fair to an Ohio State or a Tennessee. Teams that have really good losses on their record, besides the Michigan loss if you're a Buckeye fan. But teams that have been dominant, they've looked strong all year. And for them to not get a bye because they're in a deeper conference than, say, the Mountain West or the Big 12, then it's not really fair to those schools. The biggest example of this that we can look at is Texas. Texas has 2 losses on their schedule. It's to the same team, Georgia, one in the regular season, one in the conference championship. You could make a strong argument that Texas is a top 4 team despite those losses, But because they're in a deep conference and they lost their conference championship game, they don't get a bye. So I think the way to fix this is either you get rid of the conference championships entirely and you just focus on making the best 12 teams the automatic spots in your playoff, or you honor those conference championship spots, but you don't give them the automatic bye. It's just an automatic clinch. It'd be kind of similar to, I guess you could say, like a wild card spot in the NFL where you're automatically in, but just because you have a certain credential, whether that's a division win or a conference win or whatever, you don't automatically get the bye. I think that's the best way to go about it. I'm sure everyone has a ton of different scenarios of, well, A equals B and B equals C, therefore A equals C. Like, no, this is college football, not an advanced level math class. Like, let's keep it simple, guys. But nevertheless, this is really exciting. I think everyone loves the 12-team playoff. It's new. It's fun to argue how 5 or 6 different teams can get in on the last weekend of the season. We're not really used to that by this time. Last year and even in years past with the 4-team playoff, kind of had a general idea of, all right, if this happens, this is going to be the 4. But if this team wins, then this is going to be the 4. So the 12-team playoff, it's exciting. I think there's going to be some upsets. Stay tuned next week to see our prediction episode. Hopefully, hoping to get some special guests on the podcast for that one. But that's going to wrap it up for this weekend. It's good to be back. Check us out on all the socials. Drop a follow, drop a comment, DM us. Spotify, YouTube, Instagram, TikTok, we're there. We're doing socials all over the place. So be sure to come check us out. That is going to wrap it up for this episode of Chop It Up Sports. Thank you guys for watching, and we'll catch you on the next one.